Dave thought he had found the perfect neighborhood when he moved to Pine Valley Gardens 3 years ago. The houses were neat, the lawns were green, and his neighbors were friendly enough to wave hello but not nosy enough to peek over the fence. His little two-bedroom house had everything he needed. A small garage for his old pickup truck, a decent backyard for his dog Rex, and most importantly, an electric bill that never went over $100 a month. Life was simple and peaceful, until that Tuesday morning in March when the moving truck pulled up next door. Dave was sipping his coffee on the back porch when he saw her for the first time. The woman stepping out of the shiny black SUV looked like she meant business. Her blonde hair was pulled back tight, she wore a crisp white blazer, and she was already talking loudly on her phone about establishing proper standards and bringing this community up to code. The first red flag should have been how she introduced herself. While Dave was trimming his hedge the next day, she marched right up to his property line and announced, "I'm Beverly Chen, your new neighbor, and the recently elected president of the Homeowners Association. I'll be conducting a full review of all properties to ensure compliance with community standards." Dave wiped his hands on his jeans and tried to be friendly. "Hey there, I'm Dave. Welcome to the neighborhood. Didn't know we were getting a new HOA president." Beverly's smile was sharp as a knife. "Oh, yes, I ran unopposed last month. The previous board was far too lenient. This community has tremendous potential, but it needs proper leadership to unlock it." As she spoke, Dave noticed the delivery truck backing into her driveway. Two men were carefully unloading what looked like the most expensive car he'd ever seen in person, a bright red Tesla with chrome trim that sparkled in the afternoon sun. "The thing probably cost more than Dave made in 2 years. Beautiful car," Dave said, trying to keep the conversation light. Beverly's expression brightened for the first time. "Tesla Model S Plaid, 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds and completely emission-free. It's the future, really, though I do worry about charging infrastructure in a neighborhood like this." Dave thought that was an odd comment since there were plenty of charging stations around town, but he just nodded and went back to his hedge trimming. Little did he know that Beverly had already spotted his outdoor electrical outlet and was forming a plan. The weirdness started about a week later. Dave was paying bills at his kitchen table when he opened his electric statement and nearly choked on his coffee. $247 for a guy who kept his air conditioning at 78 degrees and unplugged everything when he wasn't using it. This made no sense. He double-checked the dates, thinking maybe they'd billed him for 2 months by mistake. But no, this was just for March. Dave called the electric company, spending 20 minutes on hold listening to terrible jazz music before talking to a customer. Service rep who confirmed the reading was correct. "You've been using almost double your normal amount of power, sir. Maybe you got a new appliance, a hot tub, electric heater?" But Dave hadn't changed anything. Same old refrigerator, same old window unit in the bedroom, same habits he'd had for years. He hung up feeling confused and a little worried about what April's bill might look like. The mystery might have stayed unsolved if not for Rex, Dave's golden retriever, had a habit of barking at anything unusual, and lately he'd been going crazy around midnight every night. Dave figured it was probably a raccoon or possum getting into someone's garbage. But one Thursday night, the barking was so loud that Dave got up to check. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped into his backyard, expecting to see glowing animal eyes, reflecting back at him. Instead, he saw something that made him rub his eyes and look again. There was an orange extension cord snaking across his yard. It started at his outdoor outlet near the back porch, ran along his fence line, disappeared under the wooden boards, and presumably connected to something in Beverly's garage. Dave followed the cord, his anger building with every step. When he reached his outlet, he could hear the unmistakable hum of electricity flowing through the thick cable. Someone was drawing serious power from his house, and he had a pretty good idea who. The next morning, Dave knocked on Beverly's front door. She answered wearing a silk robe and holding a cup of coffee, looking like she'd been expecting him. "Good morning, Dave. What can I do for you?" Dave tried to keep his voice calm. Beverly, I found an extension cord running from my outlet to your property. I think there might be some confusion about the electrical setup. Beverly's expression didn't change at all. She took a sip of her coffee and smiled that sharp smile again. Oh, that? Yes, I hope you don't mind. As HOA president, I have certain community privileges when it comes to shared resources. Your little contribution to green energy should make you feel proud. After all, we're all in this together, aren't we? Dave felt his jaw drop. Community privileges? Beverly, that's my electricity you're using. My bill doubled last month. I'm sure it's barely noticeable for someone in your situation, Beverly said, looking pointedly at Dave's faded work shirt and old jeans. Besides, you should be supporting sustainable transportation. It's the neighborly thing to do. Dave couldn't believe what he was hearing. Beverly, I need you to unplug that cord and stop using my power. I can't afford to pay for charging your car. Beverly's smile disappeared entirely. She stepped closer to Dave, her voice dropping to a cold whisper. Mr. Torres, I think you misunderstand the dynamics of this community. As HOA president, I have significant authority over property violations, noise complaints, and general compliance issues. I'd hate for you to find yourself dealing with unnecessary fines and citations over minor infractions. I'm sure we can find a way to work together that benefits everyone. The threat was crystal clear. Dave felt his face flush red, but he also felt a chill run down his spine. This woman was basically extorting him, using her position to steal his electricity and threatening him if he complained about it. This isn't over, Dave said quietly. Beverly's smile returned full force. Of course not. We're going to be such good neighbors. Have a wonderful day, Dave. As Dave walked back to his house, his mind was racing. He'd dealt with difficult people before, but never someone who combined entitlement, authority, and complete shamelessness quite like Beverly. She wasn't just stealing from him. She was daring him to do something about it while holding the threat of HOA retaliation over his head. That evening, Dave sat on his back porch with Rex, watching the orange extension cord like it was a snake in his garden. Every few minutes, he could hear Beverly's garage door open as she moved her Tesla in and out, the electric motor making its quiet whirring sound. Each time she plugged in that car, Dave was essentially paying for her fuel while she threatened to make his life miserable if he objected. Dave had always been the kind of guy who avoided conflict, who tried to get along with everyone and keep his head down. But something about Beverly's smug confidence, her casual theft, and her abuse of power lit a fire in him that he hadn't felt in years. She thought she could push him around because he seemed like an easy target, a quiet guy with an old truck and modest income who wouldn't fight back. Beverly Chen was about to learn that she had picked the wrong neighbor to mess with. Dave just needed to figure out exactly how to teach her that lesson. Dave thought Beverly might back down after their confrontation, but he was dead wrong. If anything, his neighbor seemed to take his resistance as a personal challenge. Within 2 days of their conversation, Dave discovered that the simple orange extension cord had been replaced with something much more sophisticated. While taking Rex out for his morning walk, Dave noticed fresh dirt along the fence line between their properties. Someone had been digging, and recently. He knelt down and brushed away some loose soil, revealing a black cable buried about 6 inches underground. This wasn't some temporary setup anymore. Beverly had installed a permanent underground connection from her garage to his electrical system. The realization hit Dave like a punch to the gut. Beverly wasn't just stealing his electricity temporarily. She was planning to do this long term. She'd invested time and money into creating a hidden power line that most people would never notice. The woman had basically turned his house into her personal charging station without paying a dime for the privilege. Dave's April electric bill confirmed his worst fears. $312. His hands actually shook as he stared at the numbers on the paper. That was more than his car payment and grocery budget combined. At this rate, Beverly's Tesla was going to cost him nearly $4,000 a year in stolen electricity. He tried calling the electric company again, hoping they might have some advice or could somehow help him figure out what was drawing. So much power. The customer service representative was polite but useless. "Sir, if someone is tapping into your electrical system without permission, that's really a matter for local law enforcement or your homeowners association," she explained. "We can only bill based on the meter reading at your property." Law enforcement seemed like a good idea until Dave called the non-emergency police line. The officer who answered sounded bored and unhelpful from the start. "So you're saying your neighbor is stealing electricity? Do you have any proof of this theft?" Dave explained about the underground cable and the doubled electric bills, but the officer cut him off. "Look, sir, utility disputes are civil matters, unless you catch them in the act of tampering with your electrical panel or have video evidence. Of theft, there's not much we can do. You might want to talk to your HOA about neighbor disputes." That suggestion would have been funny if it wasn't so frustrating. Dave was pretty sure the HOA president wasn't going to file a complaint against herself. Still, Dave decided to try the official route. He looked up the HOA contact information and sent a detailed email to the board members, explaining the situation with supporting documentation. He attached photos of the buried cable, copies of his electric bills showing the sudden increase, and a timeline of events since Beverly moved in. The response came back faster than Dave expected, but it wasn't what he hoped for. The email was signed by someone named Patricia Wong, who identified herself as the HOA secretary. "Dear Mr. Torres, thank you for bringing your concerns to our attention. However, after consulting with President Chen and reviewing your complaint, we find insufficient evidence of any wrongdoing. President Chen has explained that she received verbal permission from you to access shared electrical resources for environmentally beneficial purposes. We encourage neighbors to work together on green initiatives that benefit the entire community. If you have further concerns, please address them directly with President Chen." Dave read the email 3 times, his anger building with each pass. Beverly had not only dismissed his complaint, but had actually lied to the board, claiming he'd given her permission. The woman's audacity was breathtaking, but Beverly wasn't finished. 2 days after Dave's email to the HOA, he found an official notice taped to his front door. The heading read, "Violation Notice," in bold red letters. According to the document, Dave was being cited for failure to maintain grass height within community standards and had 72 hours to remedy the violation or face a $50 fine. Dave walked around his yard with a ruler, measuring his grass in different spots. The longest blades he could find were 3¼ inches tall. He checked his HOA handbook and found that grass height was supposed to be between 2 and 4 inches. His lawn was perfectly within the rules. The next day brought another notice, this time for mailbox maintenance issues. Dave spent 20 minutes examining his mailbox from every angle. The paint was slightly faded on one side, but the handbook said mailboxes should be reasonably well maintained, which seemed pretty subjective. By the end of the week, Dave had received 5 violation notices for increasingly ridiculous infractions. Apparently, his garden hose was improperly stored because it was coiled instead of hanging on a hook. His trash cans were positioned incorrectly because they were 2 feet from the curb instead of exactly at the curb line. Even his doormat was supposedly violating some obscure rule about non-approved decorative elements. Each notice threatened a $50 fine if not corrected immediately. Dave realized that Beverly was using the HOA as her personal weapon, harassing him with bogus violations to punish him for complaining about the electricity theft. The situation got even worse when Dave ran into his neighbor across the street, an older gentleman named Mr. Rodriguez who'd lived in the neighborhood for 15 years. "Hey, Dave, you doing okay?" Mr. Rodriguez asked as they both checked their mail. "I heard there's been some trouble with your property maintenance." Dave felt his stomach drop. "Trouble? What do you mean?" Mr. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. "Well, Beverly mentioned at the last board meeting that you've been getting a lot of violation notices. She said some residents are concerned about property values if people don't keep up with community standards. Dave could barely contain his frustration. "Mr. Rodriguez, have you actually looked at my property? Does anything seem wrong with it? To you?" The older man glanced around Dave's yard and house, his expression growing confused. "Well, no. Everything looks fine to me. Better than fine, actually. Your place always looks neat and tidy." "That's because there's nothing wrong with it," Dave said. "Beverly is making up violations to harass me because I asked her to stop using my electricity to charge her car." Mr. Rodriguez's eyes widened. "She's using your electricity? How is that even possible?" Dave quickly explained the situation, pointing out the areas where Beverly had buried her cable. Mr. Rodriguez listened with growing amazement and anger. "That's completely crazy," he said when Dave finished. "You need to do something about this. She can't just steal from you and then punish you for complaining about it." But Dave was starting to realize that Beverly had positioned herself very cleverly. As HOA president, she controlled the narrative at board meetings. She had the authority to issue violation notices and levy fines. Most neighbors didn't want to get involved in disputes, especially when one of the parties had official power over their property values and community standing. Dave's worst fears were confirmed a few days later when he bumped into another neighbor, Mrs. Kim, at the grocery store. She'd always been friendly before, but now she seemed cold and distant. "I hope you're planning to take care of those property issues soon," she said without any greeting. "Beverly says you've been resistant to following community guidelines." Dave tried to explain his side of the story, but Mrs. Kim cut him off. "I don't want to get involved in neighbor disputes," she said firmly. "I just think we all need to do our part to keep the neighborhood looking good." As Dave drove home from the store, he realized that Beverly's strategy was working perfectly. She was stealing hundreds of dollars worth of electricity from him every month while simultaneously destroying his reputation in the community. She'd painted him as a difficult neighbor who refused to follow rules while positioning herself as the responsible leader trying to maintain standards. The woman was ruthless, intelligent, and completely without conscience. She'd found a way to profit from Dave's misery while making him look like the problem. Every day that passed, Beverly grew bolder and more confident in her scheme. Dave knew he was being played, but he felt trapped. Beverly held all the cards: the official authority, the community support, and the ability to make his life miserable in ways both big and small. She was systematically isolating him while bleeding him dry financially. But Dave was about to discover that Beverly had made one crucial mistake in her calculations. She'd assumed he was just a quiet, simple guy who would eventually give up and accept his fate. Beverly had no idea that her unassuming neighbor had skills and knowledge that could turn her perfect scheme into her worst nightmare. Dave thought he'd seen the worst of Beverly's behavior, but he was wrong, dead wrong. The real breaking point came on a sunny Saturday afternoon during the neighborhood's annual spring barbecue. Dave had been debating whether to attend, given how Beverly had been poisoning people against him, but he decided he wouldn't let her drive him into hiding in his own community. The barbecue was held in the common area near the playground, with about 30 residents bringing food and drinks to share. Dave arrived with a cooler full of sodas and tried to blend in with the crowd. For the first hour, things seemed almost normal. He chatted with a few neighbors who still treated him decently, played fetch with Rex on the grass, and almost forgot about his troubles with Beverly. Then Beverly arrived, fashionably late as always, wearing a flowing white dress and carrying what looked like an expensive fruit platter. She made a grand entrance, greeting people like she was running for mayor instead of just living in the neighborhood. Dave watched from across the lawn as she worked the crowd, her laugh carrying over all the other conversations. About halfway through the event, Beverly climbed onto a picnic table and called for everyone's attention. "If I could have just a moment, neighbors," she announced, her voice projecting clearly across the gathering. "I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about some exciting green initiatives we're implementing in our community." Dave felt his stomach clench. He had a bad feeling about where this was heading. Beverly launched into a speech about environmental responsibility and the importance of supporting sustainable transportation. She talked about how forward-thinking communities were finding creative ways to share resources and reduce their carbon footprints. The crowd listened politely, though Dave could see some people checking their phones or looking around distractedly. "Of course," Beverly continued, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge. "These initiatives only work when everyone participates willingly. Unfortunately, we do have some residents who seem more concerned with their own minor expenses than the greater good of our planet." Dave felt every eye in the crowd turn toward him. Beverly wasn't mentioning him by name, but her meaning was crystal clear to anyone paying attention. "It's really quite disappointing," Beverly went on, now looking directly at Dave with fake sadness in her eyes. "When someone is too selfish to support clean energy, even when the cost to them is minimal. I mean, we're talking about maybe $20 or $30 a month to help reduce emissions and set a positive example for our children. $20 or $30. Dave felt his face burn with anger. Beverly was standing in front of the entire neighborhood, lying through her teeth about how much she was stealing from him while making him sound like a cheapskate who hated the environment. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived 3 houses down, raised her hand. "Beverly, are you saying someone is refusing to help with the charging station?" Beverly sighed dramatically. "I don't like to name names, but when people prioritize their wallets over their principles, it affects all of us. Some neighbors understand that we need to work together for the greater good. Others," she trailed off, shaking her head sadly while looking pointedly at Dave. Dave felt the crowd's attention pressing down on him like a physical weight. Conversations had stopped completely. Even the kids had gone quiet, sensing the tension in the adult gathering. Dave realized this was a calculated public humiliation designed to cement his reputation as the neighborhood villain. "Perhaps," Beverly continued, "we need to find ways to encourage cooperation from residents who are resistant to community progress. After all, this is about more than just one person's electric bill. This is about what kind of community we want to be." The applause that followed was scattered and uncomfortable, but it was applause nonetheless. Dave looked around at faces that had been friendly just months ago, now showing expressions ranging from disappointment to outright disapproval. Beverly had successfully painted him as an anti-environment villain in front of everyone he had to live next to. As the crowd began to disperse back into smaller conversations, Dave found himself standing alone near the edge of the gathering. Even Mr. Rodriguez, who'd been sympathetic before, seemed to be avoiding eye contact. Dave realized that Beverly had just delivered a masterclass in public manipulation, turning his legitimate complaint about theft into a character assassination. Dave left the barbecue early, his face still burning with humiliation and anger. But the worst was yet to come. That evening, as Dave was trying to cool down his house after the day's heat, he noticed something troubling. Every time he turned on his air conditioning, the lights in his living room dimmed noticeably. When he switched on the ceiling fan in his bedroom, the refrigerator seemed to struggle to maintain its hum. His electrical system was being pushed to its limits. Dave grabbed a flashlight and went outside to investigate. What he found made his blood run cold. Beverly hadn't just upgraded her cable again, she'd installed what looked like a professional charging station in her garage, the kind that required serious voltage to operate. The thick black cable running underground to his house was now carrying enough electricity to power a small business. Inside his electrical panel, Dave could see that his main breaker was running dangerously close to capacity. Beverly's new charging setup was drawing so much power that his own home's electrical system was struggling to function properly. His lights dimmed every time her car started charging, his air conditioning couldn't keep up with demand, and his appliances were operating under strain that could damage them permanently. The financial implications hit Dave like a truck. His May electric bill was going to be astronomical, But worse than the money was the realization that Beverly's theft was now affecting his quality of life in his own home. She wasn't just stealing from him anymore. She was actively degrading his living conditions while upgrading her own setup. The breaking point came the following Tuesday when Dave's mother visited for her weekly dinner. At 78 years old, Mom had trouble regulating her body temperature and relied on air conditioning during hot weather. Dave had prepared her favorite meal and was looking forward to their usual evening together. But as soon as Beverly's Tesla started its charging cycle around 8 p.m., Dave's air conditioning began struggling. The house, which had been comfortably cool moments before, started getting warm and stuffy. Mom began fanning herself with a magazine, then asked Dave to turn up the air conditioning. "It is up, Mom," Dave explained, checking the thermostat. "The system's just having trouble keeping up tonight." Within an hour, the house had become uncomfortably hot. Mom's face was flushed, and she was having trouble catching her breath in the stifling air. Dave opened all the windows and set up every fan he owned, but it wasn't enough. His mother's health was being put at risk because Beverly was sucking so much power from his system that his air conditioning couldn't function properly. When Mom started feeling dizzy and had to sit down, Dave knew he'd reached his limit. This wasn't just about money anymore, or even principle. Beverly's selfish theft was now threatening the health and safety of the people Dave cared about most. Dave helped his mother to his truck and drove her home early, making sure she was safe, in her own properly air-conditioned house. As he drove back to Pine Valley Gardens, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, Dave felt something fundamental shift inside him. For weeks, he'd been trying to handle this situation through proper channels, following rules, being reasonable. He'd filed complaints, tried to negotiate, even endured public humiliation in the name of keeping the peace. But Beverly had escalated beyond theft and harassment into something that put innocent people at risk. As Dave pulled into his driveway and saw Beverly's garage glowing with the lights of her charging station, all powered by electricity stolen from his house, he made a decision that would change everything. Beverly Chen had picked the wrong neighbor to push around. She'd assumed Dave was weak because he'd tried to be reasonable. She'd mistaken his patience for powerlessness and his kindness for stupidity. Dave had been an electrical engineer for the county power company for 20 years. He understood electrical systems better than Beverly could ever imagine. And after tonight, after watching his mother suffer because of Beverly's greed, Dave was done playing defense. It was time for Beverly to learn exactly what happened when you stole from someone who knew how to make electricity do whatever he wanted it to do. Dave barely slept that night. Every time Beverly's Tesla kicked on its charging cycle, the house lights would dim and he'd hear the air conditioning struggle to keep up. By morning, he'd made his decision. 20 years of working as an electrical engineer for the county had taught him everything he needed to know about power systems, electrical loads, and what happened when those systems were pushed beyond their limits. The next day, Dave called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. He had planning to do, and it was going to take his full attention. He started by driving to the county offices where he worked, using his employee access to research Beverly's electrical setup. Public records showed she'd pulled permits for a Level 2 electric vehicle charging station, the kind that drew 240 volts and could pull 40 to 50 amps of current. Dave did the math in his head. Beverly's charging station was designed to draw about 12,000 watts of power. Running for 6 to 8 hours every night, that was around 70 to 90 kilowatt hours per charge cycle. At 15 cents per kilowatt hour, Beverly was stealing between $10 and $14 worth of electricity every single night. Over a month, that meant she was costing him somewhere between $300 and $400 in stolen power, but the money wasn't even the worst part anymore. Dave's house electrical panel was rated for 200 amps total. His normal usage ran about 30 to 40 amps during peak hours. Beverly's charging station was adding another 50 amps to that load, pushing his system dangerously close to its maximum capacity. That's why his lights dimmed and his air conditioning struggled. His electrical system simply wasn't designed to handle that much additional load. Dave spent the morning sketching out Beverly's setup, calculating power draws, and designing his response. He had access to specialized electrical equipment through his job, devices that most homeowners would never see or understand. More importantly, he had the knowledge to use them safely and effectively. The plan that formed in Dave's mind was elegant in its simplicity. Beverly had installed her charging station, assuming she could draw unlimited power from his system without consequences. But every electrical system had limits, and Dave was going to teach her exactly what happened when those limits were exceeded. That afternoon, Dave drove to the county electrical supply warehouse, where he'd worked with vendors for 2 decades. His supervisor, Tony Valdez, was surprised to see him. "Dave, what are you doing here? I thought you called in sick." "I did, but I need to pick up some equipment for a home project," Dave explained. "Personal electrical work. Nothing serious." Tony raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. Dave had always been one of their most reliable guys, and if he needed equipment for home use, Tony wasn't going to make it difficult. Dave signed out a power conditioning unit that looked like a small, gray box, but contained sophisticated electronics designed to monitor and control electrical flow. The device was normally used to protect sensitive equipment from power surges and fluctuations, but Dave had something very different in mind. He also picked up a programmable relay system, the kind used in industrial applications to automatically control electrical circuits based on specific conditions. To anyone else, it would look like standard electrical equipment. Only Dave knew how he planned to modify and program these devices. Back home, Dave spent the next 3 days carefully installing and configuring his equipment. To any neighbor who might peek into his garage, it looked like he was simply upgrading his electrical panel. Dave mounted the power conditioning unit next to his main breaker box and ran new wiring that appeared to be standard home improvement work. But Dave's installation was far from standard. He'd programmed the system to monitor the electrical load on his main panel continuously. When the load exceeded normal household levels, specifically when Beverly's charging station kicked on, the system would detect the unauthorized power draw and respond accordingly. The beauty of Dave's setup was in its precision. He'd calculated exactly how much power Beverly's Tesla could handle during charging. Electric vehicle charging systems had built-in protections to prevent damage from power fluctuations, but those protections had limits. Dave's device would detect when Beverly started stealing his power and then generate a controlled electrical response designed to overwhelm her car's charging system without creating any danger of fire or injury. Dave tested his system extensively, using electrical meters and simulation equipment he borrowed from work. He wanted to make sure his device would only activate when someone was drawing excessive power from his system, protecting his own appliances while targeting the theft. The power surge he'd designed would be strong enough to damage Beverly's charging equipment, but not dangerous enough to hurt anyone or cause property damage beyond her car. The programming took careful work. Dave had to account for the normal variations in household electrical usage, making sure his system wouldn't trigger when he ran his washing machine and air conditioning at the same time. He also built in safety features to prevent the device from activating more than once per day, avoiding any chance of repeated surges that might affect his own equipment. While Dave worked on his electrical project, Beverly seemed to be growing even bolder. She'd started parking her Tesla in her driveway. During the day, the bright red paint job gleaming like a taunt. Twice, Dave had seen her showing off the car to other neighbors, bragging about how convenient it was to charge at home and how much money she was saving on fuel costs. The irony wasn't lost on Dave. Beverly was literally bragging about the money she was saving by stealing from him, while his own electric bills climbed higher every month. She'd even posted photos of her Tesla on the neighborhood social media page with captions about living the green lifestyle and investing in the future. Dave's anger was cold and calculating now, not the hot fury he'd felt during the barbecue incident. Every wire he connected and every line of code he programmed was motivated by a calm determination to end Beverly's theft once and for all. She'd pushed him past the point of hoping for a reasonable solution. Now he was going to provide consequences that Beverly would never forget. On Thursday evening, Dave ran a final test of his system using a high-powered space heater to simulate the load Beverly's charging station created. His monitoring equipment showed perfect responses. The device detected the excessive power draw and generated exactly the type of electrical surge he'd designed. Everything was working exactly as planned. Dave also took time to document everything Beverly had done. He photographed the underground cable, printed copies of his electric bills showing the dramatic increases, and even recorded Beverly's car charging in his garage using a small camera. If she tried to take legal action after his plan worked, Dave wanted proof of her theft and trespassing. Friday night, Dave sat in his kitchen with Rex at his feet, watching the clock and waiting. Beverly's Tesla typically started charging around 11 p.m., like clockwork. Dave's monitoring system was active, his equipment was ready, and months of anger and frustration had crystallized into this single moment. At 10:47 p.m., Dave heard Beverly's garage door open. Through his kitchen window, he could see the glow of her garage lights as she positioned her car next to the charging station. Dave's heart started beating faster as he watched the familiar routine that had been costing him hundreds of dollars every month. Beverly plugged in her Tesla and headed back into her house, probably assuming she'd enjoy another night of free electricity courtesy of her neighbor's generosity. She had no idea that Dave had spent weeks preparing a very special surprise for her expensive car. Dave's monitoring equipment showed the power draw starting exactly as it had every night for months. Beverly's charging station was pulling its usual massive load from Dave's electrical system, completely unaware that this time would be different. This time, Dave was ready to give Beverly exactly what she deserved, delivered at precisely the right voltage and amperage to teach her a lesson about stealing from the wrong neighbor. Dave watched the power meter on his monitoring equipment as Beverly's Tesla began its charging cycle. The familiar electrical draw appeared on his display, 52 amps pulling directly from his house's electrical system. For months, this had been the moment that made Dave's stomach clench with anger and frustration. Tonight, it made him smile. At exactly 11:43 p.m., Dave's automated system detected the unauthorized power draw and activated. The device he'd spent weeks designing and programming sent a precisely calculated electrical surge through the underground cable that Beverly had so carefully buried between their properties. What happened next was more spectacular than Dave had ever imagined. Beverly's garage lit up like a 4th of July fireworks show. Through her windows, Dave could see bright flashes of electricity arcing inside her charging station. The smell of burning electronics drifted across both yards, sharp and acrid in the night air. Then came the sound. A loud electrical pop followed by what sounded like a small explosion. Dave's monitoring equipment showed the power draw from Beverly's side dropping to 0 instantly. His system had worked perfectly, delivering exactly the right amount of electrical feedback to overwhelm her Tesla's charging system while protecting his own electrical panel from any damage. The silence that followed was beautiful. For the first time in months, Dave's house wasn't being drained by Beverly's theft. His air conditioning kicked into full power, his lights brightened, and his electrical system settled into its normal, peaceful operation. Dave was still admiring his handiwork when Beverly's front door burst open. She ran outside in her pajamas and slippers, screaming at the top of her lungs. "My car! What happened to my car?" she shrieked, disappearing into her garage. The screaming that followed was even louder. Dave could hear Beverly cursing and yelling, though he couldn't make out all the words from his kitchen window. Rex's ears perked up at the commotion, but Dave just scratched his dog's head and enjoyed the show. About 10 minutes later, Beverly came storming across both yards, still in her pajamas, her face red with rage. She pounded on Dave's front door like she was trying to break it down. Dave took his time answering, making sure to grab his tablet with all the documentation he'd prepared for this moment. When he finally opened the door, Beverly looked like she was about to explode. "What did you do to my car?" she screamed, her voice cracking with fury. "I know you did something. My Tesla is completely fried. The charging port is melted. The battery system is destroyed. Everything is ruined." Dave kept his expression calm and innocent. "Beverly, what are you talking about? I was just sitting here watching TV with Rex." "Don't play dumb with me," Beverly spat. "You sabotaged my car. I'm calling the police right now, and I'm going to sue you for every penny you have." Dave nodded thoughtfully. "You know, Beverly, if you're going to involve the police and lawyers, I think that's a great idea. I've actually been documenting some illegal activities in our neighborhood that I'm sure they'll be very interested in." He held up his tablet, swiping to show photographs of Beverly's underground cable. "For instance, I have pictures of someone running unauthorized electrical connections under property lines without permits. That's actually a form of theft, and it's also pretty dangerous from a safety standpoint." Beverly's face went pale as she realized what Dave was showing her. "I also have copies of my electric bills," Dave continued, pulling up more files. "Funny thing about these bills, they show my electricity usage doubling right around the time you moved in. I'm sure investigators would find that timing pretty interesting." He swiped to another screen showing a video file. "Oh, and I have video? Footage of someone's car charging in a garage while connected to electrical equipment that runs underground to my property. The timestamp shows this happening every night for months." Beverly stared at the evidence with growing horror. Dave could see her mind racing as she calculated how much trouble she was actually in. "The way I figure it," Dave said conversationally, "you've been stealing about 12,000 watts of power every night for about 4 months. At current electrical rates, that works out to roughly $1,500 in theft. In most states, stealing anything worth more than $500 is considered a felony." Beverly's jaw dropped. She clearly hadn't realized how much money was involved or how serious the legal consequences could be. "But wait, there's more," Dave continued, enjoying Beverly's growing panic. "Running unauthorized electrical connections across property lines without permits is actually a code violation that can result in fines up to $10,000. And since you're the HOA president, I'm pretty sure there are additional legal issues about abuse of authority and harassment." Dave pulled up copies of all the bogus violation notices Beverly had sent him. "I've also been keeping track of these frivolous citations you've been issuing. Creating false official documents is fraud, Beverly. Using your position to harass someone who complained about your criminal activity is corruption." Beverly stood on Dave's doorstep, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The confident, threatening woman who had been tormenting Dave for months was suddenly faced with the reality that she'd been committing multiple serious crimes. "Here's what's going to happen," Dave said, his voice still calm but firm. "You're going to remove that cable from my property immediately. You're going to pay me back for every penny of electricity you've stolen. I calculate it at about $1,800, including late fees and interest. And you're going to withdraw every single one of those fake violation notices you sent me." Beverly found her voice, though it came out as a croak. "But my car, it's completely destroyed. The repair estimate will be over $30,000, Dave shrugged. "That's what happens when you try to steal electricity, Beverly. Electrical systems have safety features, and when you overload them illegally, sometimes equipment gets damaged. I'm sure your insurance company will be very interested in how the damage occurred. You can't prove you didn't sabotage my car deliberately," Beverly said desperately. Dave smiled for the first time since this conversation started. "Actually, I can. See, everything I installed is completely legal electrical equipment designed to protect my home's electrical system from overloads and surges. When someone illegally taps into that system and draws excessive power, the equipment automatically responds to protect my house from damage. That's exactly what it's designed to do." Beverly realized she was trapped. If she accused Dave of deliberately damaging her car, she'd have to admit to stealing his electricity. If she pursued legal action, Dave had enough evidence to send her to jail for theft, fraud, and code violations. The way I see it, Dave continued, you have two choices. You can quietly fix this mess, pay me back, and we can pretend this never happened. Or you can involve lawyers and police, and we can let them sort out who's the real criminal here. Beverly stared at him for a long moment, her face cycling through rage, fear, and defeat. Finally, she turned and walked back toward her house, without saying another word. Over the next week, Beverly moved like a ghost through the neighborhood. She quietly removed the underground cable, left an envelope with $1,900 cash on Dave's doorstep, and submitted her resignation as HOA president. 2 months later, a moving truck appeared in Beverly's driveway. Dave watched from his front porch as she loaded her belongings, including what remained of her damaged Tesla. She never looked in his direction, never said goodbye to any neighbors, and never acknowledged that her reign of theft and harassment was over. The new HOA board, freed from Beverly's manipulation, immediately apologized to Dave and reimbursed him for all the frivolous fines Beverly had tried to impose. They also implemented new rules requiring board approval for any electrical work in the community. As Dave watched Beverly's moving truck disappear around the corner, he felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge. Sometimes, when dealing with bullies and thieves, the only language they understand is consequences. Beverly had spent months learning that Dave was just a quiet, easy target. She'd learned too late that sometimes the quietest people have the loudest bite, especially when they know exactly how to deliver it at the right voltage.